Alison James, the Senior Director of European Government Programmes for IPC. Welcome, Alison. Nice to see you today.
Nice to see you, Tom.
Okay. So it was only really a few weeks ago that we spoke at Apex in San Diego, but so much has happened since then. So let's start with the European Chips Act, because that was one of the topics we covered back in January. I believe it started to make its way into fruition in February. Can you maybe elaborate on what's happened there?
Yes, absolutely. So when we met in January, and after that, on the 8th of February, the European Commission came forward with a proposal for the long-awaited European Chips Act. So it is quite a substantial package. It's really looking to develop the chips ecosystem, so from design through R&D, through production, front end and back end, through packaging of chips. So it's quite a comprehensive package. It's making its way now through, it will go towards the European Parliament and the European Council, so there's still a legislative process that needs to go through. We have definitely welcomed the CHIPS Act. This is something that we need in Europe. Every region is looking to see dependencies. Everyone's had supply chain shocks. So we've welcomed the package. We've certainly welcomed the fact that they include packaging in that, that they're recognising the need to look not only through the ecosystem, but through to the packaging.
Are they also looking at the PCB side as well? Because obviously there's we need more PCB manufacturing in Europe, as well as OSATs and the other things that you need with packaging.
We need more of everything. We certainly need more of everything in Europe. So the CHIPS Act, what we see is that the CHIPS Act is a very important and a very vital first step in rebuilding and building the European manufacturing ecosystem, and that's the point that we're making to the European institutions. So we're welcoming the Act, we're welcoming the fact that they are including packaging in that. There's still some clarity that needs to come out in terms of where the funding will be directed and exactly what will be included. So really the point that we're making is that we do need chips, and we need to make sure that we have chips of all sizes. Looking forward, also the small under 2 nanometer chips. But looking towards the future, packaging is also where a lot of the innovation is taking place, right? So let's make sure that in directing the resources, that it's also going towards filling the gaps that we don't have in Europe, building up what we don't have or building more of what we do have. And that means focusing on IC substrates, for example. It means focusing on OSAT. But in addition to that, as we go forward, can we please understand that in order to make this sustainable in all senses of the word, then we need to make sure that we're really going towards a silicon-to-system approach, and that includes having a supportive ecosystem around chips. Otherwise, you'll make chips, and then you'll have to ship them somewhere else, either for packaging and or for later stage also, the printed circuit board manufacturers.
So Alison, I'd like to take a deeper dive into what's in the CHIPS Act. Can you explain exactly how it's structured?
Yeah. So I think it's a question of what's in the CHIPS Act and what isn't in the CHIPS Act, right? That's kind of... It's quite a comprehensive package, so I'll try to explain maybe very briefly that it's divided into 3 pillars, basically. The direction and the focus is intended to build up the chips ecosystem, from design through R&D through to production, and also ensure supply chain security for chips. Right. So 3 pillars, and the first pillar is really looking at building up long-term capabilities in Europe. So that includes all of the design aspects. It's the R&D side. It's really looking to make sure that you're developing advanced nodes and going from design and bringing it through from lab. They call it from lab to fab. So getting it out from R&D, where Europe is very good, and actually making sure that you're integrating it, right?
Is that something that's going to be done by the companies themselves at their level, or is this something that's going to be done through European institutes like Fraunhofer and IMEC and people like that?
So all of that is involved, and they're setting up a joint, coming from KDT, JU, the joint undertaking, setting up a new structure, the CHIPS joint undertaking. So a lot of that will go under that structure, and that's R&D focused, and they also reference training in there. The second aspect then, and that's also important in the CHIPS Act, and that's also new, is sort of again in the immediate to longer term, building up Europe's capabilities on chip front end and back end production. So what's important in that is that that's looking at the state aid regime in Europe. So It's really giving the possibility for member states to close the funding gap for what they're calling a first-of-a-kind facility. So that is really an innovative facility, and there's very detailed language that goes around that. But that's enabling front and back end, so packaging again, production in Europe, financed by member states,
Right.
that would then be allowed under state aid control as long as they are what they call a first-of-a-kind facility, so we don't already have that in Europe, that there are benefits across the member states, and those benefits should also go through the value chain. So there's language around that.
So would that include? That wouldn't include, though, for example, if there was an area, say, in PCB manufacturing. You know, if there was an area, if we didn't have enough PCB manufacturing to support the eco chain.
So
it's
here's
just going to be
yeah.
specific areas of research that are going to be innovative.
So this is really around production. So this is enabling. Chip manufacturers and 2 nanometer and the chip and production
Right.
that we don't have in Europe.
Right.
That's the definition of a first-of-a-kind facility. But it's also important because this is looking to see what do we have, what do we not have in Europe, and if we don't have it, and there is innovation within that, then the funding could be provided by member states. But there's a whole dialogue also to be had around that. What do we mean by innovation? Is this product innovation? What about process innovation? I think that leads to a lot of future discussions also that can be important for the industry, because here they're also referencing node. Again, it would take a little bit longer, but there's a lot of language in there around, and some thinking around what do we mean by innovation.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And that goes to first-of-a-kind facility, right? But this is new, and it can also be important for the future depending on the language that goes in there. But the third pillar in the CHIPS Act then is around security of supply. So this is setting up a mechanism between the member states and the European Commission it's kind of a monitoring of supply chains. And the idea is to address, to understand. They want to understand the supply chain and the value chain more, which is a good thing from our perspective. But they also want to make sure that these bottlenecks don't arrive in the future and that there's a mechanism to address that. So there's also a legal framework that's being put in around security of supply. So it's 3 pillars, and the intention is let's address bottlenecks and issues that we have in the short term. In the immediate term, let's put in the production facilities also for higher end chips. Again, a discussion to be had around what size of chips. And also in the longer term, then it's building up the innovation in Europe's technological innovation in the longer term. But again, in all of this, there's a governance structure and a lot of analysis, gap analysis, discussion with industry that will go around this. And our point in all of this is, yes, you've referenced also back-end manufacturing. In addition to making sure that we have the chip capabilities in Europe, let's make sure that this is sustainable so that you have the ecosystem around that you're not designing and producing high-end chips without having the ability also and thinking through the chain. That also means changes. It means more innovation for printed circuit board manufacturers. It means changes for EMS and assembly companies. So all of this needs to be thought through and integrated. And certainly as part of the CHIPS Act package, that we need to make sure that packaging is thought through, because that is part of the CHIPS Act. And looking at the gaps in Europe. So as we've said, IC substrates, let's make sure that we're looking at IC substrates and also OSAT, so final assembly and testing.
Is there an initiative to work with a wider collaboration as part of this activity? I mean, you mentioned that before we started the interview that there have been some negotiations between the European Union and the United States, for example, on collaborating in some of this technology transfer.
Yes, so what's happening at the moment, at the end of last year, generally in international relations there's a dialogue that's going on, there's a recognition in regions and in the European Union that not everything can be produced in Europe, that we need to look to see what needs to be, what can be and needs to be produced in Europe. Where it's not produced here, or even if it is, how can we collaborate with like-minded partners with trusted trading partners. So one of those partners, and a very important partner, is the US, and that's a dialogue that began at the end of last year. They're actually continuing next week, and we've been putting comments also into that. They're looking to see how can we, going forward, make sure that we have resilient supply chains, that we have partnerships between the regions. So the comments that we've been putting in there is let's make sure that we are looking again across the ecosystem, and that we're looking to see, well, where are the gaps, where can we collaborate, how can we collaborate in R&D. But when you're doing that, please make sure that you're looking across the entire electronics manufacturing ecosystem and understanding the importance of manufacturing in this, and not only focusing on one part of the value chain.
Right. But I mean, do you think this regionalization, do you think it's becoming fairly critical now? I mean, there's been so many things happening. The supply chain shocks keep coming one after the other, after the other. We need to be able to have, almost independence within Europe for manufacturing of these highly critical components, because electronics is such an integral part of our lives now.
Yeah.
We can't afford not to have that capability.
I think you're absolutely right, Trevor. And also in Europe, Europe's future is very much going towards this digital and green transition, right? So electronics are really at the heart of that.
Yeah.
And there is definitely a recognition of the vital importance of semiconductors in delivering on those objectives, and delivering on greener technologies, and delivering on digital. The point is, as you said, all of electronics is actually involved in that. Electronics manufacturing is a strategic industry to make sure that Europe is going in the way that we want to go, to make sure that industries and our strategic industries are able to be at the forefront and continue to innovate, and innovate in the way that Europe wants the world to innovate.
I think I think one way that perhaps Europe and US could certainly collaborate is on the supply of raw materials, because one of the things that we've noticed initially with the US trade wars with China, they were starting to threaten about rare earth materials, for example. And then we had the supply chain shocks coming out of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The US has got quite a large supply of rare earth metals that they could help to fill that gap, as it were, over here. So I think collaboration on these types of levels would be interesting too.
Yeah, and I'm sure that that's also part of the focus between the EU and the US, but also between the EU and other regions, right? So they're looking really globally to see where can we make sure that we have access within our trusted trading partners and like-minded partners to all of the inputs and the materials that are needed for our strategic industries going forward, and to deliver on this green and digital objective. But the EU-US dialogue is indeed very, very broad. It goes beyond supply chain resiliency. It's looking at all kinds of future collaboration on technology, and this should also be maybe the first of many, or at least a number of similar partnerships that the European Union is looking to strike with other regions. And this is all about, in a sense, diversification and mixing production in Europe with making sure that we have the inputs that we need. So we want to make sure, obviously, that in each of those negotiations and discussions that there's a real understanding of what electronics manufacturing needs, what are our needs in the region, and also, how do we need to be collaborating with other regions to make sure that what's not being produced here, that our industries have access to what they need in a secure way, in a timely way, in a sustainable way.
Yeah. I think you're doing a fantastic job. I think it's a really important job. What's next for you? I mean, what's your next goal in terms of trying to open up collaboration with Brussels?
With Brussels, the CHIPS Act, we're really at the beginning, Trevor. It was announced in February. We have a lot more to do. Electronics are at the center of everything. They're at the center of everything. So we certainly want to be in so many discussions to really highlight that electronics manufacturing is the strategic industry at the heart of so many of the areas that Europe wants to develop. So the CHIPS Act, that will continue for the next year. The discussions and the negotiations with the EU and the US and other regions, that's also going to continue over the next year. And we have a host of sustainability-related issues. There's
Environmental
really
issues, yeah.
There's a lot of environmental shifts and changes as Europe is looking to shift and change to a circular economy.
Yeah.
So we have many many legislative files that are coming down the track that are being renegotiated. We also have more analysis of supply chains and sourcing in supply chains, and this is, I think I mentioned last time, another very important file, which is the due diligence legislation, corporate sustainability due diligence, which is really looking to see how can we make sure that in companies' value chains, all companies' value chains, that care is being taken of environmental impacts, of human rights impacts. So that again is a spotlight on global supply chains. So sustainability in its broadest sense in ESG and through environmental legislation is also very much a focus for us.
Sustainability is a huge topic, but I mean it also covers the back to the regionalization argument. I mean it makes absolutely no sense to be manufacturing products in one part of the world and sending them completely across the other side of the globe and having a huge carbon footprint. We need to reduce that carbon footprint so that we're not having to pollute the atmosphere or endure these ridiculously high freight costs.
Yeah. I mean, and of course that will be company decisions how they answer this, right? But having said that,
but it's up to government to create the conditions for that to happen.
Exactly. It's up to government to create a competitive investment and innovative environment in Europe, so that companies can manufacture, so that a supplier base can be built up in Europe in a cost competitive way, and also that they are at the forefront of innovation. Because why would you choose? You'll choose because they're sustainable, because they're innovative, and also because very clearly it's important to have your ecosystem around you. Otherwise, we're really only addressing part of the issue and not the resiliency and supply chain issues or the innovation and technological leadership issues, which is also what Europe wants.
Yeah. Well, as I said before, it's very important work, and I'm really grateful that you're there because we've needed representation, stronger representation in Brussels for a long time.
IPC is very dedicated to the industry and to making sure that we are part of the dialogue and that we are putting forward the voice of the industry. That's very important to IPC, right. So we're very happy to do that. Very happy to be here.
Good. Okay, well, thank you very much for telling us about it and coming in today.
All right. Thank you, Trevor. My pleasure.
Electronics are part of our world, expanding by application to open up new opportunities for automotive, healthcare, and many other industries. But today's manufacturing techniques are not sustainable. They are energy hungry and inefficient, expensive, and have limited flexibility. The world is asking us to do better. Introducing Pulse Forge tools, a new approach to thermal processes like soldering and curing. Design with more flexibility, manufacture with fewer process steps, reduce energy use, and decarbonize the supply chain. Expand your creativity to new levels. Designers are asking for more. They need to reduce form factors, reduce weight to work on wearables and stretchables, opening new market opportunities for consumers across the world, asking us to do better. If you think sustainability and freedom of design are not possible in electronics manufacturing, think again. Think Pulse Forge.